Please read the public notice.
Adequate notice of this meeting was given in accordance with the Open Public Meeting Act by mailing the schedule of the Township Committee to the Express Times and North Star Ledger newspaper, posting a copy of the Township Bulletin Board, and filing a copy of the Township.
Please join me in salute to the flag. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Perez.
Here.
Siegel. Here. Emiliani. Here. Flores.
Here.
Torriello.
Here. Tonight's special meeting was scheduled to discuss the annual financial statement for 2011, and given the, I guess, complexities, the amount of information in it, the seriousness of it, and the fact that we wanted to make sure that there was an opportunity for the public, as well as other township committee members, to ask Mr. Morrison any questions. We've scheduled this special meeting for that purpose. And before I turn it over to Mr. Morrison, I just want to say that on January 1 of this year, this new township committee started in earnest in working extra hard to provide the level of transparency that Greenwich residents deserve and should expect. Part of that, in delivering on the transparency, was facilitated by bringing in a new auditor, a new CFO, and new treasurer, new township committee members, a new mayor. We have done a lot, a new finance chair, and through those new set of eyes, we have reviewed the past, and the past is not good. And Mr. Morrison is going to explain his findings and recommendations as to what Greenwich needs to do to move forward. But I want the record to be clear, and I want Greenwich residents to be assured that the new Township Committee understands the severity of these findings. We will be working diligently to take corrective action, and I also want the record to be clear that there are members of this present Township Committee who bear no responsibility to the findings that Mr. Morrison is going to lay out. Tom and I were not on this committee when these findings, what is detailed in the findings, occurred. Many of you know I was a vocal critic in the audience, expressing some concern about the conduct of the prior CFO in terms of adopting or making recommendations about emergency appropriations. I voiced concerns at that time that it was not prudent to do, particularly in the timing of it. And I believe there were sufficient red flags at that time that should have warranted a closer review and corrective action undertaken sooner. And I want the record to be clear that in my opinion, much of this blame lies squarely on the doorstep of the former finance chair, Bruce Williams, who the auditor will detail in his report his explanation and description that there was simply abject neglect with respect to township finances. And with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Morrison to share with the committee and the public his findings as detailed in the annual financial statement.
Thank you, Mayor. I was here on February 16th and provided a preliminary report to the Township Committee regarding the findings through that date. At that point in time, the annual financial statement had not been completed. There were some significant areas of the township's financial records that I had not been able to go through and work with the CFO to balance and reconcile for the year end. This meeting tonight is basically for me to update the committee on the findings now that the process has been completed. The annual financial statement has been filed with the Department of Community Affairs as required. Within that document, there is a space for the auditor is actually, the auditor is required to report to the Division of Local Government Services any matters coming to his or her attention during the process of AFS preparation that represent non-compliances with laws and regulations, significant deficiencies in the financial statements, and a punch list of items that is part of what's known as an agreed-upon procedures engagement required by the Division of Local Government Services. What we put in that in the annual financial statement with respect to our findings appears on sheets 1A1 and 1A2 of the annual financial statement itself. There are 8 specific items listed. The first one is virtually a verbatim repetition of my comments and my memorandum to the governing body from February 16th regarding the absence of a general ledger record for the current fund of the township. Nothing has changed from those comments. I believe they are virtually verbatim repeated. Item number 2 on the list deals with cash reconciliations, what accounts were reconciled through what period, what items were missing from the cash receipts, cash disbursements journals.
I'm sorry, you know what, Mr. Morrison, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just realized you're referencing item number 1 as being verbatim, and we have a copy of your report in front of you, but there are folks in the audience who may not have it, and there will be folks watching the video who won't have it in front, so if you can summarize for the record so that people know what you're referring to, it might be helpful.
Okay, with respect to item number 1, the general ledger, we basically state that the general ledger was not maintained in a condition that approximates the record-keeping standard required by the New Jersey Administrative Code. The general ledger was found to be unreliable. 1 out of 53 general ledger accounts with a balance at January 1st, 2011, the start of the year, had a balance that was in agreement with the audited financial statements for 2010. We noticed that even though the general ledger is a product of double entry bookkeeping and debits are supposed to self-balance with credits, the general ledger was not in proof and total credit exceeded total debits. We also noted that there were no journal entries recorded in the general ledger document during the year to reflect significant transactions of the township, specifically things like the adoption of the 2011 budget wasn't recorded in the general ledger. The striking of the 2011 tax levy wasn't in the general ledger. The charge-offs of non-cash items of appropriation or the recognition of non-cash items of revenue in the 2011 budget were not posted to the general ledgers. That sort of thing. So essentially, what we were left with was a general ledger record that was not a usable record and not a compliant record with respect to the standards set by the state of New Jersey and the Administrative Code. The second item deals with cash reconciliations. We touched on this during the meeting of the 16th. Essentially, we noted that cash was not reconciled for the current fund, sewer operating fund, and recreation trust fund since September 30th, and the remainder of the township's accounts were not reconciled after October 31st. We noted that in addition to the cash not being reconciled, the cash receipts journals and cash disbursements journals did not represent a full listing of the cash transactions of the township during that period. We have some numbers in the AFS report regarding the amount of current fund deposits and credits not recorded. It was a little over 70,000. We identified some of those transactions. As part of the process, we have a net $38,000 item that the CFO is going to have to track down deposit by deposit. With respect to the sewer operating fund, the net unposted amounts were $936 of cash receipts and $318 of cash disbursements. Most of the smaller accounts had very little cash transactional activity during November and December, and essentially for the smaller accounts, the only things missing from the records of receipts and disbursements was the recording of interest earned on the accounts. So for accounts with little activity, it didn't create much of a problem. Then we got to the payroll account, and we ran into some significant problems, and these were not disclosed on February 16th. Essentially, we found no centralized record maintained by the township to track receipts and disbursements relating to net payroll and the various withholdings of taxes, union dues, pension payments, etc. That was a self-balancing account that would lead to a monthly identification of the balances. Now, something was being done during the first 10 months of the year to arrive at a balance, but search as we may, if we looked at the January cash reconciliation, it showed a beginning balance, it showed cash receipts for the month, it showed cash disbursements for the month, and an ending balance. We could not determine where the cash receipts number came from. We could not determine where the cash disbursements number came from. There was no centralized check register. There are checks that are issued by the payroll company for net paychecks to your employees who receive checks. There are also debits made to your payroll bank account to wire money for direct deposits into employees' bank accounts. And then the township writes checks for certain items such as union dues, disability insurance, 403Bs, that type of thing. So there are checks being written from two separate places. You also have debits being made to your bank account for taxes withholdings. Everything including federal income tax, Social Security, Medicare, New Jersey, Pennsylvania taxes for, you have one employee on and off during the year who was having Pennsylvania taxes withheld, your state unemployment, disability taxes, that type of thing. On top of that, money from the township's account would also be deposited into the payroll account for the employer's shares, and that would also be taken. What we're looking for is a centralized record, in effect a mini general ledger, tracking amounts withheld, say for federal income taxes, payroll by payroll, with an offsetting disbursement and an indication whether or not that balance is cleared or if there's a balance being carried. The purpose of having something like that is if there's a balance, it means either you paid the wrong amount or there was an adjustment made to payroll that didn't get into the payroll account records. So the idea is you want to track what the payroll company says was withheld with what you paid to determine whether or not what you paid is in proof with what was withheld, and if not, to start the search. None of that was going on. So we ended up having to do a reconstruction of the record. We also found that in doing that, the amounts posted for the first 9 months of the year as receipts and as disbursements didn't agree with the payroll records. On top of that, we noted that the payroll account is carrying some very old outstanding checks that should probably be canceled, and they in fact would then represent a balance that could come back to the township's general operating account as revenue. There's also a balance in the account of roughly a little over $8,000 that represents either unidentified items or differences between what was withheld and what was paid in periods that are more than two cycles old. So it looks to us that that can be canceled and sent back. So after everything's said and done, the work that we did with payroll suggests that there may be as much as $17,000 worth of township revenue sitting in that account, either as outstanding checks that are very old and will never be processed by the bank because the checks are stale at this point, or old unidentified over deposits to the payroll account that should be taken back and recorded back as revenue in the current fund. So that was somewhat of a positive thing.
positive that we have the money. Positive that we have.
Positive is that although the records were not in the type of condition that I would have hoped for, and that is a minimum standard that I believe is required, after everything is said and done, we found what we believe is $17,000 that will go to increase the township surplus account when the transfers back are made. No, we're not happy with the way the records were kept. We're happy with the fact that we at least found 17 grand for you. No, and by the way, I have been working with the CFO. I've been talking to her before any of this gets written so that she's aware of what the problems are. She's already started on corrective actions for a lot of these items. So hopefully by the time we get to the point where we're ready to file the audit, we'll be able to note in the audit report that many, if not all, of these items have either been corrected or are in the process of being corrected already. That's the goal. Item number 3 we also talked about at the meeting on the 16th. It dealt with $100,000 worth of cash that I was afraid was missing from the current account. Turns out it wasn't missing. However, it was sitting in another bank account and being counted as current fund cash. I spoke to the CFO, who spoke to the prior auditor. He responded and confirmed that that was in fact what was going on. But the cash had not been, no transaction to clear the cash and move it to where it was being recorded was ever made. So
it was in the wrong spot.
It was in the wrong spot.
And the auditor didn't pick up on that, the prior auditor?
No, and quite honestly, I think it may have been there since before the prior auditor was first appointed as auditor. I think it may go back several years. Anyway, I was unhappy with the explanation, and I contacted the state, the Division of Local Government Services, to determine whether or not they found that accounting treatment acceptable or whether or not a restatement of cash has to occur. They concurred with me, and the cash balances in the current fund and the general capital fund have been restated in the annual financial statement. The beginning balances have been changed to reflect the actual cash in the accounts on December 31st, 2010. What that does to you in your current fund is it lowers your beginning fund balance, because instead of having cash, you now have an interfund account receivable, which under New Jersey rules doesn't count towards your surplus. You can get it back in 2012 by moving the cash, right? And I suspect what initially happened was somebody said we need more surplus in the current fund, and the capital fund owes us $100,000 in the current fund, so move the cash, we'll reflect it as having been done on December 31st, and then nobody moved the cash. Right? So the accounting is wrong, but the harm that is done to you with respect to your surplus can be reversed during 2012 by cutting that check from capital back over to the current fund. Item number 4 deals with the conditions that we encountered as we closed out the records for the sewer operating account for the year. Essentially, the comments here mirror the comments relating to the general ledger, the cash receipts, the cash disbursements, cash reconciliation for the current account. Basically, the work stopped for the sewer operating fund. At the same time, the work stopped for the current fund. Essentially, we have cash reconciled through September 30th for the operating fund. We have one additional issue with the sewer operating fund that the CFO and I are going to have to go over, and it deals with sewer overpayments. There is a balance reported at December 31st of $10,000, which is basically a beginning balance of $6,000 per the audit, plus $4,100 worth of cash receipts that were collected during 2011 that were recorded in the general ledger as sewer overpayments. The problem is that when you go to the sewer billing and collection records, they're only showing an overpayment at the end of the year of $4.71. So what we think might be happening here is that there are payments being made that are subsequently being applied to later bills, and they're not being removed from the overpayment account and applied as revenue against the open balances. We're going to have to walk through a couple of the accounts to determine that that is exactly what happened. But the good news is that your sewer operating surplus may actually be close to a little over $10,000 higher than is reported in the AFS. Item number 5, recreation, deals with recreation trust. Once again, the last reconciliation was made on September 30th, so there's 3 months worth of transactions that were essentially not posted. The other thing we noted with respect to the recreation trust is that the financial records are not set up to track the reserve balances, the money available for expenditure by program. There's one reserve account, everything gets lumped together in it. And that seems to not be what the commissioners of the Recreation Commission would like, and it also goes against good accounting practices, because if you don't know whether or not your programs are making money or losing money, you don't know whether you're pricing them fairly. So one of the things that Lorraine and I hope to do is modify the chart of accounts so that that data, because right now my understanding is that the Recreation Commissioners maintain this massive Excel spreadsheet that they track everything with respect to each program on. We can make their lives easier if we can capture that data in the financial records of the township. So we're going to try to modify the chart of accounts so that basketball receipts, wrestling receipts, swimming receipts, and offsetting disbursements are captured for each program separately and then aggregate to the total reserve that would show up in the audited financial statements. This way, on a monthly basis, a copy of the cash reconciliation and the transaction report can go over to the Recreation Commission. They can review it, call up and get any changes made if they think a mistake was made, or if there's no mistakes, save them all the work of doing all the data entry on the Excel spreadsheets, hopefully. So that's an objective. Item number 6 deals with the Animal Control Fund, which is basically dog and cat licenses. Everything, right, what was happening there is that there are several, accounting pots that cash receipts go in, right? There's, when a license is issued, there is money that is due to the state of New Jersey. There's 3 separate fees that the state of New Jersey can take depending on whether an animal is spayed or neutered. There are current license revenues, and then either towards the end of the year or if multi-year licenses are being issued, there's a separate pot called prepaid license fees that should be, money should go into if they represents license fees for a subsequent period. What was basically happening with the financial records in 2011 is everything was going into a reserve account and everything was being spent out of a reserve account. So at the end of the year, we can't tell without actually physically going through the licenses, whether or not you owe the state money, whether or not you have any prepaid licenses. So right now, everything is sitting in a reserve. When we come in and do the audit, we may have some additional changes to that account. Again, the process, Lorraine will be changing the process so that when the monthly dog reports are filed with her, which they will be, well, you should and you must. Lorraine should be getting copies of the monthly dog license reports that are filed with the Department of Health. And that will allow her to figure out what of the money that's been deposited to the account belongs as fees due to the state of New Jersey, monies reserved for expenditures in the current period, and monies reserved for future expenditures in subsequent periods. So one of the things that has to happen is that she has to get copies of those monthly reports and then perform a reconciliation process to match up what has been deposited to the account to what's being reported to the Department of Health. Item number 7, and this one is somewhat problematic, deals with the township's escrow account. The escrow account, and this is very specific, it deals with monies required to be deposited with the township under your ordinance and the state's Municipal Land Use Act. It covers fees for professionals to do planning and zoning reviews. It can cover engineering inspections during construction. It can cover a whole bunch of things under the Land Use Act and your ordinance. Basically, what the escrow was set up for is to assure that the resident taxpayers don't pick up the burden of improvements being made by outsiders, or even if it's a resident. Any improvement you want to make to your house, the cost of that improvement, the oversight of that improvement should not be borne by the taxpayers. That's the idea behind the escrow accounts. Anyway, the township set up escrow accounts with one of the local banks years ago. At some point, the accounts were transferred from one bank to another. And at that point, roughly $94,000 of escrow balances was transferred to an account called Old Escrow Accounts. That nobody has any idea who belongs to that money, if it's the township's money, if there are 1, 3, or 37, people who had made deposits in a prior period that may be entitled to it. That's problematic because you don't know, at this point, you don't know what to do with the money, right? It's sitting there, and it may end up sitting there forever unless somebody goes back and tries to do a tracking, and it could very well be that a good chunk of it belongs to the township, because the way that the escrows work is any interest earned that's less than $100 a year, the township keeps it. Any interest that's earned over $100 a year on each individual deposit, if the initial deposit was over $5,000, the township gets to keep 1/3 of it. If the deposit was under $5,000, the township gets to keep it all.
But we don't know that because there was no proper record keeping.
No
so
record.
Again,
Yeah.
we're in a situation where the taxpayers, because of the poor record keeping, it has a negative effect on the township.
Are we able to ask questions now, or are we waiting for the report? I didn't realize we were able to make comments. I mean, okay, why don't you finish?
If anybody has any questions,
Bob,
as far as I'm concerned, feel free.
The one question that pops up is, was there any record of the closing of the old bank account and the opening of the new bank accounts, and who did them?
We believe it goes back several years.
I think the escrow accounts go back many, many, many years.
Yeah.
Right? Long before our CFO that just left.
That was one of the reasons why we changed CFOs and auditors.
Okay,
Clear
well,
that up.
you've got $93,000 that we're not sure who's entitled to any of it. We also have an account that's called Township Operating Account. That has a balance of just about $25,000. We're not sure what the origins of that account are.
Never heard of it.
We also noted that more than half of the individual escrow accounts are in the name of the township and not of a depositor. That presents a couple of problems. A, the CFO has no idea whose money it is. B, because the accounts are made out to the township, it's impossible to send out the quarterly financial reports that are required under the Municipal Land Use Act. For every escrow deposit, there is supposed to be a quarterly report that is prepared by the bank, sent to the township, and then mailed to the escrow depositor. When we were going through and reconstructing the records for 2011, we found all 4 sets of those account statements. So it appears to us that no account statements were sent out to any of the depositors during 2011. That's a problem, and that's something that has to be fixed. The fix for that is first to identify every depositor that you possibly can, get the account information at the bank changed so that it has a name and address for the depositor, so this way when the account statements come, all you have to do is stuff some envelopes and get them in the mail. That will get you back into compliance with that aspect of the law for everybody you can identify. Then you're going to be left with trying to figure out whether or not you have to escheat the money to the state of New Jersey, or if you're allowed to keep some or all of it, because there's a pretty good possibility that either because interest earnings or costs paid not charged to the accounts, that a lot of that money belongs to the township. And we know that there's a possibility that accounts, that costs were paid and not charged to the accounts, because when we were doing the reconciliation for December, we noticed there's 5 or 6 outstanding checks that are currently written that had not been charged to the individual escrow accounts. So what appears to be happening is that the charges are being made after the checks clear rather than before the checks are written. And the cart is before the horse in that instance. You need to charge the account at the point you write the check, because A, it stops the interest accruing on that account, and B, this way you can't forget, because part of the reconciliation process should be bank minus outstanding checks equals balances. Instead, what we're doing is we're saying balances minus outstanding checks equals bank.
And this happened in 2011.
Yeah, this was ongoing. The issue with the checks being written and not charged was going on in 2011.
Any earlier than that?
There are no outstanding checks in this account that go back that far. So if it was going on in prior periods, the checks either cleared and were or were not charged. But anything that was written and charged against the account has either cleared or never been recorded as being charged. So
were escrow accounts actually established for separate escrow, for separate things like for the Board of Adjustment or the Planning Board during this period, this year?
Yeah, there were new accounts. There
Okay.
were several new accounts that were opened during the year. There were, I would say, between 5 and 10.
Okay.
So that part of the process appears to be working. You had, at the end of the year, you had, during the year, you had probably about 95 to 100 individual escrow accounts. During the year, other than interest earnings, you probably only had about 20 of them that had any activity. And the 20 that were showing activity, again, everything that cleared the bank was charged to the accounts. It was only at the end of the year we noticed there were some checks written that hadn't been charged.
Okay, so they were written first and then charged.
Yeah. So that's got to change. And then the other thing is that this accumulated unidentified balance has to be identified if at all possible. And then anything that can't be identified, a determination has to be made as to what you're going to do with the money.
So you're saying there's escrow accounts that still need to be closed?
I mean, the balance, just to give you an idea of...
I mean, is 100 escrow accounts normal for I mean, are these supposed to be open
well,
this long or that many?
The process usually is that the escrow account is opened at the point that people are making applications to one of the boards, either planning board or zoning board if necessary.
Right.
At that point, money is deposited. As the work is done, the planners are doing reviews, any other professionals that you have to have in, engineers, professional planners, traffic studies, whatever it is, they get charged to these accounts. Periodically, an invoice may go out to replenish the account if they've blown through the initial deposit. But at the end of the construction period, at the point where everybody signs off, it's often customary to use the balance in the escrow account as a performance guarantee in lieu of a performance bond. So some of these things may have been allowed to sit rather than being refunded because they represented performance bonds, cash in lieu.
Or they could have been charged to the municipal account and not charged to the escrow account.
That's my biggest fear, and that would mean
Which would mean that the taxpayer
could put it together, and that's why I would hesitate to suggest that's cheating the money because there's not necessarily a direct correlation between what a professional bills and where it gets charged.
The sewer also involved with those particular escrows because the infrastructure for the sewer was built at that time.
Any escrow is part of this account. There's
not a separate
set for the utility,
okay.
no. So there's a possibility that there is a significant amount of township money tied up in this escrow account that you're not getting credit for. It's sitting as a liability on your books rather than part of a fund balance of some sort. So there is motivation, if you will, to try to clear up what the heck is going on. And one of the biggest problems that I've run across in my career is, in fact, what you mentioned. Engineers submit a bill, the initial reaction from somebody preparing a purchase order for payment, charge the engineering line. Lawyer provides a bill, charge the legal line. Planner provides a bill, charge the planning line. And to the extent that work was being paid out of a budget that should have been paid out of the escrow account, the taxpayers footed a bill that hasn't been paid back yet. And there could be, again, there's significant amounts of unidentified money in this escrow account, and if it all was to belong to the township, that would go a long way towards solving some of the budgetary problems we're going to be facing.
If it's the prior, what's our liability on that? If it wasn't, if it was the taxpayer money.
If it's taxpayer's money, all you'd have to do is identify the fact that it's a taxpayer's money and write a check out of the escrow accounts to clear those amounts and put it back over.
So you can reconcile it?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, no, it's not something that can't be corrected, particularly since you have the money. I mean, if there was no money in the escrow account, then whatever the taxpayers had paid, that's it, unless you could go out and get more money out of the depositors. But usually once the permits have been issued, the boards have ruled, it's tough to get money out of them, particularly if they rule no.
Imagine that.
So that's I think the biggest obstacle that you're going to face in the next few months is trying to clean up those escrow accounts. And then finally, item number 8 on my list deals with permanent records. The state of New Jersey requires certain records be maintained by every municipality in the state, and that they be permanent records, available forever. Things like records of tax billings and collections, annual sewer billings and collections, budget appropriation ledgers, revenue ledgers, general journals. We didn't find a whole lot of those things for 2010 when we went looking for them. We didn't find some of them in print for 2011 until we asked for them. And the problem we have is that with your accounting system, if you want to know what the 2011 budget appropriations and expenditures looked like on December 31st, 2011, you need to run a report on that date, because if you run a report subsequent to that date, it's going to include subsequent transactions. It's going to give you the 2011 budget as of February or March, which means that somebody comes in and says, I want to see the gory details behind the numbers that are going to show up for 2011 in the 2012 budget. If you haven't produced a run,
so you can't set parameters of dates to print within. There are certain things that override the date settings on the admin system.
So did you find them?
We did not, and so it's a concern for us. That's one of the things we're going to spend more time at audit on. But the reason we brought it up now is because to the extent that anything can be run for the year ended December 31st, 2011, and there's a list. The state library actually is the keeper of the list of official permanent records.
Wouldn't you think they have to be here? I mean, the auditor would have required them last year, right?
Yes.
Did anybody speak with the last CFO?
Here's the thing. Well, we went through the files, right? They're supposed to be on file here.
But I think files were moved after the CFO resigned. So someone else moved files, right, Kim? They were moved downstairs?
No, not after she resigned. I didn't touch anything. Nothing. The only thing that is moved is when Lorraine came, we went through, we pulled all the records that he requested from his list.
So weren't files moved downstairs?
The bills that were paid, they were kept in monthly envelopes, so those.
So no one had a conversation with the last CFO to say where are the 2010 records?
No, I did not, at least.
Was there a turnover process?
They're supposed to be here, right?
They're supposed to be in the building.
Was there a turnover process?
Well, it's in
Well-
one of 2 places, or 3 places. It's either in the finance office downstairs, in the finance office downstairs, or in the vault. And they're not in the vault, they're not in the downstairs finance office, and they're not in the
So,
office.
Bob, are you finished with your report?
Believe I am.
Okay. can we ask some questions? Okay. Couple things. First of all, this is an unaudited report, right? It's not an audited report.
Oh, no. They
This is
expect that
unaudited.
there will be more to come, I'm afraid,
Okay.
when we actually get into the audit process.
Okay, and in your unaudited report and findings, did you find any cash missing?
No,
No cash?
No, we were-
Okay, so that's a good thing.
that's a good thing.
Okay. And a number of your findings, as you numbered them, quite a few of them, in my opinion, when you say that things weren't done after September 30th, our CFO gave her official notice to leave October 30th. We asked her to stay on another month just to handle the minimal things. So many of the things that you talk about when you say September 30th and on, we didn't have a CFO to handle that. I didn't hear that any place in the report saying CFO wasn't here, right? So September 30th and going forward, like bank statements are in the rear. How is a CFO going to, who was supposed to do that work if the CFO wasn't
Well,
here?
Tanny, to be clear, and just so that the question is fair, we had a CFO until November 30th, and his report says things weren't done after September 30th. So when you do the math, it wasn't done in October or November when the CFO was here, and regardless of the CFO, and I have to tell you, and I'm particularly troubled by your continued attempt to what I perceive to be attacking the findings of the CFO. And I understand your defense mechanisms, but I want the record to be clear. This happened on your watch. You were mayor for 2 years. And when that CFO left, you and former finance chair Bruce Williams, the two of you, had an obligation to figure out someone needed to do it until December 30th. Because when a CFO leaves, that doesn't discharge our responsibilities as a township to keep records. So whether the CFO is here or not, you were here as mayor, and Bruce Williams was here as finance chair, and you guys dropped the ball. And I got to tell you something. I want the record to be clear. I am very troubled by your continued effort to obfuscate the findings and to appear to be attacking, as opposed to rolling up your sleeves and saying, what do we need to do as a township to right the ship? Because regardless of who the auditor was before, what the auditor found and didn't find, he didn't find it. This auditor did, which proves, I think, the wisdom in this township committee's moving in with new professionals to find things. And Bob, I want to ask you something.
I'm not finished with my question.
In light of what is what appears to be an attempt to politicize this, what I would like to ask you is, would it be, based upon your findings, would it be within the reason of this township committee to adopt a resolution requesting the Division of Local Government Services to perform their own financial review of township records and your audit as well?
If there's any question as to whether or not what I'm telling you right now is the truth, or in any way motivated by anything other than my professional obligation to disclose, I would highly recommend you pass that resolution.
And you know what, I agree with you. Let me finish, okay?
Sure.
I don't need you preaching to me, all right? What I was saying was, the CFO resigned October 30th. Bank statements are always in arrear. Is that correct? Do you get your October bank statement in October?
She leave October 30th or November 30th?
She left November 30th, but she was supposed to leave October 30th. We asked her to stay to handle the minimal amount of work, the mandatory things that were required, okay? Now, a couple things, and I'd like you to let me finish. And don't tell me this isn't politicized, because it is. Okay, so I want to finish. You were talking about the payroll, and I'm not attacking Bob, I'm asking questions.
No, that's fine.
Okay?
Absolutely.
Bob, you talked about the payroll count.
Yes.
Not being handled properly. Do you know if that was identified in the 2010 audit? Because I don't think we were handling payroll any differently in 2011 than we were in 2010.
I don't have the 2010 audit in front of me at the moment.
Would you expect that to be something that would be identified if it was a major issue?
I would hope so.
Okay, because I don't remember that being in the audit.
No.
And the general ledger, the last time you were here, I don't think you answered my question. I had a question. I said, does every municipality in New Jersey have a general ledger? And you went on to say that, you know, you teach the class and this, that, and you never answered my question. Does every municipality in New Jersey, I know you said it's a legal requirement,
Absolutely.
but does every municipality have a general ledger?
Have you worked for every municipality?
No, I
in the state
don't.
of New
And let
Jersey?
me tell you how I.
That's not what I'm asking.
Here's the only way I can answer this question.
No, I'm asking the
Here's the
question.
only way I can answer this question. Every municipality that I serve as auditor for, with the exception of Greenwich Township, maintains a general ledger at this point in time.
Okay, now, what I found out was the CFO and the auditor, please don't make comments when I'm trying to make a statement, okay, Joe? You did this before. The CFO and the auditor, the last auditing firm, would come in at the end of the year and complete closeout activities, end of the year in January, for closeout activities. Our CFO wasn't here, and we ended the contract for the last auditor, okay? In the townships that you serve as an auditor, have you ever gone in to help with the closeout activities?
I was forced to do it here.
Not asking about here. Other municipalities, do you ever help with the closeout transactions at the end of the year or the beginning of the new year?
Only on an emergent basis.
Okay.
Can I just make a comment?
Sure.
The auditor really shouldn't do that.
I understand that, but I'm asking, does he do it?
On an emergent basis, and only on an emergent basis. And what we do is we send in people to assist in the closeout, and they don't get anywhere near that town when it comes time for audit. So we put up a Chinese wall between anybody who does any work in assisting in a closeout with anybody who's doing any audit work.
And also, generally when there's work being transitioned, and if you're having difficulty finding records, wouldn't it be normal to call up the last employer and ask the question? Where did you keep the 2010 file?
Well, let me tell you, I think you're missing something here. We prepared a list of records that we requested before we set foot in this place. And one of them was general ledgers for all accounts. And what we got was indicative of the fact that nobody had been paying any attention to the general ledger in this town for at least 3 years. So if the auditors were coming in and assisting in the closeout, they were actually creating a separate record, separate and apart from the general ledger, that served as the basis for an audit. And they shouldn't be doing that, because your general ledger is your Bible, and your general ledger had balances that were so far off that we could actually do the math and figure out that it was 3 years worth of tax levies that hadn't been posted to the general ledger, which was why you were showing a negative $21 million balance in school taxes. So there's no doubt in my mind that the record that was handed to me as the official general ledger had not been maintained properly for 3 years. Now, if you're telling me there's another general ledger someplace, I wasn't given that. Right, but you're using.
But when you asked for the information, who did you make the request of?
I made the request through Kim to Lorraine.
And did anyone speak with Grace to find out where the records were?
I did not.
Would there be any reason why we wouldn't ask the last CFO?
Would there be any, my question is, would there be any reason why you wouldn't just go into the accounting system that you're paying good money on an annual basis for and generate the reports off of the system that I asked for, which is what they did.
Would there be any reason why someone knowing full well that they're leaving with 60 days in advance wouldn't prepare some sort of turnover plan if they were hopeful?
I'll make it
just to say, hey, this is my stuff, I'm leaving, this is for the next guy. I mean, it's a normal turnover plan with regards to any corporation. If I leave my job and I'm leaving, I'm going to say, hey, this is my desk, here's all my files.
I'm just going to say that I find it a bit strange that work needed to be transitioned and no one had a conversation with the last CFO. And I doubt that anyone had a conversation with the last auditor.
I did.
So
you did?
Yeah.
And they didn't?
Yeah, it's not appropriate for your current auditor to talk to your prior auditor unless there's a go-between and there has to be an authorization from the municipality authorizing the prior auditor to talk to your current auditor. It's a confidentiality.
This is what I would like to say.
So what did the auditor say?
We actually, let me clarify that. We prepared a list of about 10 specific items that we couldn't find anywhere in the finance office that we needed to figure out where the township was at December 31st, 2011. So I gave the list to Lorraine, who sent it up to my predecessor auditor, who went into his work papers and was able to provide some of the information we had asked for.
Thank you, Bob.
So Tanya, do you think that if we call Grace and Sharon or wherever today, they're gonna have this miracle box of ledgers that we can have if we pick up the phone and call her?
No, I'm just saying that I'm making a comment.
I'll call her.
That,
I'll call her now.
That
Give me your phone
the fact
number.
that we're here, that we're getting this report, okay, and no one has had a conversation with the last CFO as far as transitioning work. We're saying files are missing. No one had a conversation with the last CFO. The other point I would like to make is this. You know, an audit, I'm not saying that the audit isn't factual, but I also feel that it's a bit distorted. And what I would say is, Joe, you're saying, you can smile all you want, I'm going to make the statements I have to say, okay? That you're saying it's not politicized or whatever, it is politicized. It is politicized. You and Elaine, and I'm going to personalize this, Elaine had her hit list of employees, and you've gone along with the program, Joe, and this is absolutely politicized. The findings are distorted to the point where we have 2 pages of findings, and it probably could have been written up in three sentences.
I would recommend you bring the state in then.
Yeah.
I absolutely, I believe we should too. I believe we should too.
Tanya, you could have picked up the phone and had this all go away by making a phone call to Grace yourself.
Wait a minute,
You could have easily, you're talking about one of us picking up the phone, you could have done it as well. You're an equal-bodied member here. You could have done the same thing and picked up the phone and got the information.
I didn't know what information they were looking for because I wasn't part of the audit process.
February 16th, you were made aware that there was problems here. You could have picked up that phone and you could have made the request yourself. So don't put it on Joe or me.
Well, actually, Bob, I think that, and I want to ask you this question. I'm a little bit, again, you know, I understand Tanya has a vested interest in deflecting because this happened on her watch, and you know the folks will judge it for the. Well, you were the mayor for 2 years.
No, Joe.
Quite honestly, you owe the public an apology.
Elaine cannot say that she wasn't part of the committee. She'd like to sit over there.
Actually, it was 4 to. No, I sat in the audience.
I voted against it.
That's right.
You what?
I voted against it.
Oh, you didn't vote for any bill paying in 2011 whatsoever, Elaine.
Tanya, I didn't vote for her to be CFO. How's that?
Wait a minute, hold on a second.
Look.
Elaine, I'd like to say something.
I did not vote for her.
Wait a minute. Wait. What? First of all,
one at a time. I'm speaking.
Okay. In the ear.
Elaine, you brought in Grace.
Temporarily.
Let me finish. You brought in Grace. You brought in Sharon.
I didn't. Bring
you
in
hired
Sharon.
Chief Guzzo.
I did not bring in Sharon.
You brought in Sharon.
I did not bring in Sharon.
Okay, I want to stick to the agenda because my point, Bob, was this. There's been discussion tonight from Tanya suggesting that because the records aren't in the office, okay, that they're not here on premises, that somehow that would excuse the CFO's poor performance, and that somehow you have not done your job as an auditor.
I did not say
that. You keep asking where the records are. So let me ask you this, Bob.
I believe they're here.
Is it legal to take the documents off premises?
I didn't suggest they were
Okay,
taken
so if
off
the
premise.
answer is no, and they have to be on premise, you've looked here. The records aren't here in this building, are they?
Couldn't find them.
Okay.
Wow.
So
we didn't
I
ask
don't know why
anybody
we're
where
having
they
this
were either.
conversation. It seems to be a silly conversation.
No,
to the
it's
extent
not a
that you
silly
keep
conversation,
suggesting
Joe.
something
No,
that
Joe.
isn't there,
Not a silly
Tanya.
Where would they normally be?
When he's indicated he's in the building, he's reviewed the records here.
Joe,
so there's either two scenarios.
Joe, an audit report. Let me just say one
no,
thing.
let me finish without you talking over me. I know it's difficult, and if you need to, we could
Well,
take a
nobody
5-minute.
made you king.
We could take a 5-minute
You're not
recess and you
king
can
anyway.
collect yourself if you need to.
No, I don't need to collect myself. I'm quite in
Well,
control.
then if you can stop interrupting me so I can finish.
Go ahead and finish, and then I'll finish.
There's
my
only
point.
two scenarios. Either the former CFO broke the law and took the records off premises, or they're not here because she was incompetent. And I'm going to not accuse her of breaking the law. We'll just accuse her of incompetence and abject neglect, as the auditor found in the record. And I'm telling you, because of my commitment to transparency and to the citizens here of Greenwich, I'm not going to allow you to politicize this, and I strongly recommend that we adopt a resolution to bring the state in to review these records so that it will be a verification of the findings of this auditor or not.
I second that.
And that's my motion, to bring in, I would like, the request a motion to, that the Division of Local Government Services be asked to come into Greenwich and to conduct a financial review of our township's records in light of the findings of our auditor.
I'll make the motion.
So why I'm not finished with my comments. So why are we in a motion right
Is there
now?
a second?
I'm not finished with my comments. Okay,
Can I
so you
get a
get into this
second?
whole motion in second.
Can I get a second?
I'm not finished with my
You can have the
comments.
comments after.
No, I want my comment right now. Remember, I was talking and Joe talked over me, so now I'd like to finish.
Don't ask for a resolution, I made a motion.
Yeah, is there a second? And then a comment?
No.
Second.
Is there a second?
No.
All right, so there's a second on there. Now
Now you
comment.
can comment.
Now you can comment.
So what I would like to say is, an audit report is like a survey. Whatever result you would like to find, you can develop the survey to the finding that you would like. And when you don't,
I beg your pardon. Now I am insulted. An audit is an independent review of the finances of the township. If you're telling me that what I have included in the annual financial statement as deficiencies in the financial records is fictitious,
I didn't say that. I didn't say they weren't factual. What I said was facts can
Can
be
you not yell? Can
distorted.
you not yell? Please, can you
Yeah.
calm down?
Yeah.
Thank you.
facts are one of the few things that can't be distorted. They're facts. There is nothing that I have included in the annual financial statement that is not 100% true.
I didn't say that wasn't true.
Well,
What I said was,
then
I'm not
you
arguing, you're
have,
making a statement.
All right. The records are requested.
I printed them out. I don't know if this is a good time to inflect anything or not, but Edmunds offers a year-end wrap-up. It's a year-end financial review, and it details, I want to say, 10 different reports that you should print out. If you're not familiar with the Edmunds system or not familiar with doing your own year-end closing, you can use it as a guide. If you print everything exactly that's on there, you have all of your, not only your year-end reports, you have all your reports that are static, such as the report that we were trying to generate after the fact was a detail of your appropriation reserves. The problem with that is, as of December 31st, you may have $80,000 left in reserves, but the very first second that you spend something in 2012, of the 2011 budget, your appropriation reserve is decreased. You can't go back and create that report. That's not static. There are a lot of other reports that are static, but that particular one, which you need to provide detail for any of your encumbrances, is not static. But that's on the year-end procedures for Edmunds. So all of those reports, I'm very familiar with them. I've worked with them for years. I printed them all out. There's no opinion. There's no interpretation. You just print the reports. General ledger.
But you did that for December 31st.
2011.
Right.
My problem.
Because
my
there was
problem-
no- there was no one here
my
to
problem
run the
is,
report.
yeah, my problem is that there are beginning balances in the 2011. It's actually not in the ledger. It's in the 2010 audit report. There are balances for encumbrances payable. There are balances for tax overpayments. There are balances for sewer overpayments. There were, like I said, there were 10 separate records that I needed to ask Lorraine to contact my predecessor for work paper records because there were no records of these accounts and balances located in the municipal building.
One of the biggest problems is that the beginning balances, January 1st, 2011, were never changed to reflect the audit report for 12/31/10. So if the auditor said you should have $5,000, then you should start out January 1st with $5,000. It stayed at $7,500, and there was no adjustment throughout the year to change it to what the audit report had. The audit report, unless a finance officer can completely 100% justify why it should be a different number, the audit report is what you have to go to. And the balances here were never adjusted to reflect that on a lot of accounts. I'm sure there were a couple that were, but the vast majority of them were not adjusted through any journal entry to reflect the findings of the prior year audit. So the beginning balance was off. So he had to work with the prior year's audit, figure out what happened in the course of the year, and then kind of step back into it. But a lot of them just didn't flow.
Are there any other comments?
Yeah, just one more. I just want to reiterate that the fact that you're saying this isn't a politicized meeting here, Joe, I couldn't agree. It's just amazing. I find your behavior, I just want to go on record, I find your behavior and Elaine's behavior despicable. And that's my last word on that.
Okay. Dan, do you have any comments on this before we vote?
Yeah, I just have a question about if the state were to come in, what does that entail?
It's an outside set of eyes, right?
They, depending upon their ability to schedule, they might send 2 or 3 people up and basically go through a process, something similar to the process I followed in developing the AFS. They used to offer it as a free service years ago, and they had a checklist that they would come in. They'd want to see, very specific records, and they'd give you the checklist in advance. I'm not sure if they're doing that at this point, but if you've got any questions about, what I'm telling you tonight, I mean, I just went back and looked at the journal entry that is necessary to bring the general ledger into proof on December 31st, 2011. You're going to have roughly 30 debit entries totaling $47,526,000 that have to be made, and roughly 35 credit entries totaling $43,102,000, $43,102,000. And again, the debits exceed the credits by $4,424,000 because that's the amount the general ledger is out of balance on December 31st, 2011. That's what it's going to take just to get your current fund back in proof. So this is not, I mean, anybody who would try to tell you that the general ledger was maintained for 2011 or 2010 or 2009 would not be telling you the truth.
Okay.
Any other comments? Dan?
So what type of disruption is that to the township? Is that any type of disruption at all?
In the background.
So we should be able to still continue the way we need to continue to run the township.
Yeah, there may be additional reports to run or just having a couple of piles of paper out for them to come in, but it shouldn't be too bad.
So what I'm going to suggest is, if we're going to ask the state to come in, it's not going to be just for the financials. I want a complete review of the tax process over the last several years and all the workings, all the operational.
Right now, there's a motion. There's a motion now that we're commenting, and we're going to vote on this motion that has been seconded. That's on the floor right now.
Tell me what that motion is right now.
The motion is to bring in.
Dan still has a question.
I'm sorry.
As a committee person, okay, we rely upon, I guess mainly upon the auditors to go over all the books and everything else and then come back to us, right? Is that correct?
I'm your last line of defense.
Yeah.
Your management, it should be your first line of defense.
Okay, so then how would we know then, as a committee, then how would we know that what we're getting